I'm sort of doubly and triply happy and honored to be here to make this introduction of our speaker, Matthew Bishop. As some of you know from having taken my political economy class, or some of you next year who might take it, The Economist is required reading. I firmly believe that if every business school student read The Economist from cover to cover every week, that the world would be a considerably better place. I have that much respect for the magazine that you contribute so much to. Matthew is the chief business writer and American business editor of The Economist. Maybe you can explain exactly what that means, but I think it means that he runs what happens editorially in the United States.
Yeah, it means title inflation, I think.
Title inflation. All right. Well, not as good as salary inflation. But. So, in addition to his editorial responsibilities, which I'm sure occupied a great bulk of his time, Matthew has written a good number. I don't really know how many. I can remember 2 or 3 of these special survey sections that The Economist runs from time to time, and they are great. I think the one that I remember, I'm not sure whether it was your second most recent or third most recent, was a survey that Matthew did on private equity, which was titled Kings of Capitalism. It was very nicely done and very nicely timed. And then his most recent special survey is called The Business of Philanthropy, and that's the subject that he's going to talk about today. And then the other reason that I'm happy to have a chance to introduce our guest speaker today is that for the last year or so I've actually been working on a course on philanthropy, which will be offered in the business school next fall. It's going to be titled Strategic Philanthropy, and it will be designed to teach you how to give it away as effectively as we teach you how to make it. So I'm going to be taking careful notes today as Matthew speaks. I think the battle plan is fairly straightforward. I think Matthew is prepared to speak for 20 or 25 minutes. That will leave us 20 or 25 minutes for questions and answers from the floor. So if you'll join me in welcoming our speaker, Matthew.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. And it's quite humbling to come here and be confronted with one of your recent mistakes on the wall, because Bill Gates, who's a big reader of The Economist, saw that we made a very bad typo error in our magazine and described the health budget of Ghana as $31 a day, when of course it's $31 a year. But it's great that a reader writes in and corrects us when we get these basic mistakes in the magazine, which hopefully are very rare. But so it's good. Good to be reminded that we're immortal and human after such a warm introduction. I just wanted to talk briefly about how I got interested in philanthropy, and then about a book I'm writing on philanthropy and roughly the arguments I'm going to be making in it, and hopefully then get your reaction to it and thoughts on the subject. I really started getting interested in philanthropy about 6 or 7 years ago when I wrote another one of these special supplements, which was really looking at the phenomena of the new rich, which are the people who'd really made money made a lot of money out of the 20-year period, beginning with Reagan and Thatcher's deregulatory agenda, and seeing what they were doing with the money, how they were changing society, how they made the money, what the sociology of that group was. And it was very interesting going around talking to them, that they were all much more interested in talking about philanthropy than anything else. Particularly, it seemed to me at the time, it was partly for a defensive reason, that they had a deep suspicion of what being born with a silver spoon in the mouth would do to their children. And they really didn't want to give much of their money to their kids because they thought it would really ruin their lives. And I think a lot of the private banks at the time had started holding courses for children of wealthy people where they would help them to sort of develop values. And it was clear that setting up a philanthropy was seen as a way of somehow getting your children to take some interest in something other than drugs and wasting time on snowboards or whatever. It was like whatever the parents' concerns were, this was seen as a bit of an answer. And also because they felt, a lot of them did feel genuinely that they'd been lucky in some way, being born in America at the time or wherever it was, or in some other way they owed something to society, or they had the capacity to make a difference in society with all this money. They frankly couldn't, there were only so many yachts you could buy, and you still had a lot of money left over, and they wanted to actually make a difference. And I interviewed Gates in that process. It was interesting to see how much more interest he was in talking about giving than he was about anything to do with Microsoft or how he'd made his money, which all seemed rather dull to him by comparison. And this phenomena occurred again and again. Anyway, after that, I was somewhat intrigued by this because I hadn't expected it. I think at The Economist for years we'd argued very much for, you needed to get tax rates down if you wanted to have wealth creation, but I think we very much believed in the trickle-down theory of wealth, that if you create a lot of wealth, it will end up creating a lot of other jobs in other ways. But we hadn't really expected this phenomena of the philanthropist to be a very important one. And it was very striking to me that it was. But initially I was just approaching it quite cynically as a journalist because I realized, there were a lot of business people I wanted to interview who weren't terribly keen to be interviewed about their companies, but they were really keen to be interviewed about their philanthropy. So I'd call them up and say, I'd love to talk about your philanthropy. And then, towards the end of the interview, the subject would inevitably move on to other matters. And it was a great Trojan horse strategy. But eventually I came to realize that this was actually maybe more important than I'd been given it credit for. And certainly I went to the World Economic Forum in Davos a couple of times, and you suddenly started seeing these very wealthy people clearly getting access to politicians and to multilateral institutions and being treated very seriously by major companies and by NGOs. And it was very obvious that they were shaping agendas in a way that individuals have never really been able to do very much in the modern democracies in which we live. And certainly beyond those democracies, we're having a massive potential impact on very, very fundamental issues about the development of society. And it became clear to me that philanthropy should not just be viewed as giving money away. It should be seen as the use of all the assets that you control to pursue some kind of social mission. And if you view the super wealthy in that framework, the influence and power they have, even in countries like Britain and continents like Africa, where you don't have a recent tradition of philanthropy, the influences and role and growth of this phenomena is huge.